Look at this movie scene. It starts with the marching of these troops, who are walking with a Union Jack and playing a bagpipe. Now listen to what the Egyptians have to say.
عنطزين كأنها بلدهم مش بلدنا. الواحد بيكره يصحى ويبتدي يومه. بكره أشوف الشمس طالعة من تاني على المناظر دي. وهنعمل إيه؟ نقاوم يا أخي. نطالب بحقوقنا نسوق لكرامتنا.
This, of course, is the British occupation. Roughly 70 years when the British exercised heavy influence over Egypt. There's been a lot of literature on colonialism, especially 19th and 20th century colonialism. But what I want to focus on is two things. First is an analysis of the political structure in place. In other words, what exactly colonization looked like. And secondly, is a focus on the colonized people, their opinions and desires, and the things that they did. This era still excites the imagination of modern Egyptian cinema. But when we talk about it, we often think of it in a general sense. But today, I want to take you back in time so we can get an idea of what it was really like. Welcome to episode 6 of Egypt's recent history. Last time we talked about Egyptian rule in Sudan, so check it out in the description. And as we discussed 2 episodes ago, the British came to Egypt largely through loans. In other words, the Egyptian government had a lot of debt to pay to the UK, and that was a fate other countries also suffered at the time. So Egypt was indebted to Britain, and Ahmed Amin gives us a good idea of what that indebtedness looked like in his book, The Story of the Egyptian Economy. He cites a 1948 publication by the Egyptian economist Ali al-Gritli, which states that the only goal for the British authorities was this: to increase Egyptian government revenues from agriculture, and thereby generate enough revenue for the government to service its debts. Its debts, of course, going to the UK. And how'd they carry out that policy? This paper by Kimberly Alana Luke says that the British sent a financial advisor who would have a large role in saying where Egypt's money went. And that financial advisor had a boss, and his boss had the title of Consul General, a man who, for most of this period, was named Lord Cromer. As Aaron G. Jake says in this book, Lord Cromer and a group of British advisors basically controlled the government's policy. Ostensibly, they were there to support the not-so-independent Khedive, basically King of Egypt. The Khedive, for the most part, cooperated with the British, maybe because he had no real power, and the British could dethrone him if they wanted to, as they had once done with Khedive Ismail Pasha. The British authorities had a great disconnect with the Egyptian people. Accounts from Lord Cromer indicate that he, like many of the colonizer states at the time, saw that the British and the Europeans in general were civilized and that the local Egyptian population was uncivilized. Cromer said, quote, "Egypt for the Egyptians was and still is impossible." Egypt, with its massive debts, essentially became a money-making machine for the British Empire. And that's without mentioning, of course, the revenues collected from the Suez Canal, which the British had a 44% stake in. All these fees and all these revenues and all this money would, of course, go to funding the British Empire's military and economy. As for the British troops, they were there to ensure that this part of the world remains under Britain's influence. And as we all know, it was Britain's route to India. So essentially, you had a ruling class of British people who exercised heavy influence over the Egyptian government and who differed greatly from the locals that they were ruling. This narrative ignores something important though. It ignores the fact that the Egyptian people were still, even if it was just a minority of them, a literate and intelligent population who very importantly stood up for their sovereignty. To understand what I mean, let's go to the year 1906. In 1906, an incident occurred between British troops and a group of villagers at the town of Dinshway in the Egyptian Delta. Long story short, it was a fight that ended with 52 Egyptian villagers being arrested for crimes against British officers. The Egyptians, though, had other ideas, and one of these Egyptians was named Ahmed Lutfi as-Sayyid. As Wikipedia tells it, citing this source, Lutfi Sayyid worked to spread news of the incident. The incident in fact encouraged him to found the newspaper Al-Jarida and the nationalist political party Al-Ummah. And Lutfi Sayyid wasn't alone. At the same time, there was another anti-British agitator, and his name was Mustafa Kamil. Mustafa Kamil wanted to resist the British, and he found himself an unlikely supporter, the Khedive. The Khedive, as we said, was supposed to be a placeholder ruler and cooperate with the British, but this Khedive wasn't like that. After Khedive Tawfiq Besha died in 1892, Abbas Helmi II took power. As Ziad Fahmy says in this publication, it was Abbas Helmi who supported Mustafa Kamil's education. Mustafa Kamil would go on to found the National Party in Egypt, with Khedive Helmi simultaneously funding an anti-British newspaper. Khedive Abbas Helmi II would eventually be dethroned by the British because he appeared sympathetic with the Ottoman Empire at the start of World War I. Many Egyptians, even if a minority, far from being uneducated, worked to improve their country's educational prowess. You had this man, for example, Qasim Amin, who, as his Wikipedia article says, advocated greater rights for women and helped co-found Cairo University, the university which Ahmed Lutfi Said would go on to be its first president. In essence, you had a class of British rulers who were trying to control the nation for their own interests, and on the other hand, you had the people themselves, who were resisting and educating themselves, and at times clashed with the British authorities. These nationalistic desires would eventually burst, and the British would have to respond. But first, however, there was going to be a world war that would shape the British Empire and the Middle East until today. So stay tuned for that episode, because Egypt was quite an important part of that conflict. Until then, thank you for watching.